Temporarily Yours: Intimacy, Authenticity, and the Commerce of Sex. This book was written by Elizabeth Bernstein and was published by University of Chicago Press, 2007. 4 Books' quick and to-the-point analysis of Temporarily Yours will tell you all you need to know about the evolution of the sex trade through modern industrialization, and help you understand the many potential dynamics at play which lead women to become sex workers, as well as also sharing the client's perspective on prostitution. But before we get into our book summary, let's hear about the author's background and experience. Elizabeth Bernstein is an American sociologist who is best known for her studies on women, gender inequality, and sexuality. Bernstein has a PhD from the University of California and works as an associate professor of sociology and women's studies at Barnard College, Columbia University. She has written 2 books, Temporarily Yours: Intimacy, Authenticity, and the Commerce of Sex, and Brokered Subjects: Sex, Trafficking, and the Politics of Freedom, and co-authored Regulating Sex: The Politics of Intimacy and Identity. And now we're ready for our analysis, starting with the opening theme. From prostitute to sex worker, how the sex trade has changed throughout history. Until recently, it was widely believed that the social forces behind the existence of prostitution and other types of sex work would eventually be eliminated by certain specific factors, including the increase of female participation in the labor market and the reduction of double gender standards. Yet the sex industry has continued to flourish and has diversified spatially, socially, and technologically. People are now starting to rethink the idea that prostitution is simply the trafficking of women, which highlights harmful gender inequalities. What's more, it is no longer just the poorer and more disadvantaged classes, but also the so-called new middle classes that are becoming increasingly involved in the world of sex work. Prostitution was previously used as an example of the moral issues that arise when the human body is used as a commodity. In every associated field, from sexology to psychoanalysis, there was a tendency to normalize the behavior of the male clients, while the women were presumed to be showing symptoms of psychopathological disorders. Things began to change, however, in the 1980s, when feminist movements started to oppose the use of the word prostitute and all its negative connotations, and coined the term sex worker, which suggests that the sale of sex is no better or worse than any other industry that sells a service. In the beginning of the 1990s, prostitution and the sex trade exploded onto the pop culture scene, on talk shows and in documentaries and films such as Pretty Woman. The sex trade has since become a multi-billion-dollar, multifaceted industry. This is both a cause and a consequence of the development of other sectors of the global economy, from tourism to technology and so on. Modern prostitution is the product of modern capitalism. Although it is often said that prostitution is the world's oldest profession, it has not actually existed as we know it for very long. The rise of commercialized, large-scale prostitution in the West is relatively recent and came about following the events of mid-19th century modern industrial capitalism. It is also deeply rooted in urban settings where there is a greater abundance of both supply and demand. Numerous social historians have suggested that certain typically capitalistic characteristics, such as urbanization, the growth and volume of paid work, and the decline of the so-called traditional family unit, have resulted in new cultural ideologies of gender and sexuality, as well as new symbolic boundaries between a person's public and private life. The concept of a largely male-oriented labor market has changed, resulting in a wide-ranging double standard and gaping gender gap. This has also led to inequality among the female population, as only women from the most disadvantaged social classes had to resort to getting a job or selling their bodies through prostitution. In the past, commercial sexual encounters were generally casual and took place in taverns and pubs, but many women then began to be identified as prostitutes. In the early decades of the 20th century, a public outcry over the spread of prostitution led to the closure of many red light districts and the criminalization of the organized sex trade. This did not stop sexual commerce, however, or change the gender-driven connotation of prostitution, whereby prostitutes are considered immoral, but their clients are not. The first image that usually comes to mind when we think of a prostitute is of a girl standing on a street corner in high heels and a miniskirt, but this actually only represents a small percentage of the sex trade as a whole. This is also due to the fact that street walking is a primarily urban and social issue. The author describes her research in the Tenderloin neighborhood of San Francisco, where people were not as concerned about the immorality of prostitution as the disturbance it caused to their daily lives. In San Francisco in the 1990s, prostitution was seen as a spatial and urban issue, rather than an immoral and illegal problem. Street walking was almost entirely eliminated through widespread controls and by fining clients, and it eventually evolved into other types of services, which were mostly conducted indoors or online. Street walking, a necessary but sometimes also empowering choice. The author recognizes 3 classes of street walkers in San Francisco, and each is found in a precise and well-defined area of the Tenderloin and Mission neighborhoods. Upper-class prostitutes are typically young and slim. They dress well and take care of their hair and makeup, and appointments with these women can cost from $100 to $400. Middle-class prostitutes differ more in terms of age and build. They dress in less expensive clothes and their fees are lower. What the author calls survival sex is common among lower-class prostitutes, women who are often homeless and who prostitute themselves at all hours of the night and day because they live on the streets. They typically settle for a fee of just $20, which buys them a night in a hotel, or they offer sex in exchange for drugs. This distinction shows just how varied the sex trade really is, even within a few blocks of the same city. Upper and middle-class prostitutes generally do not rely on prostitution to survive, and it is more of a career choice. These women see it as a profession that they know how to do and that allows them to earn a lot of money, regardless of their culture and education. For many of these women, it is simply a job like any other with fixed hours and a clear separation between their private and working life. They also set boundaries around what they are willing to do with their bodies, with many giving clients access to their breasts and genitals, for instance, but refusing to engage in kissing and cuddling, which are too intimate and not for sale. The use of condoms is also always carefully monitored, as they not only ensure their physical safety but also create a psychological barrier. Similarly, many prostitutes remain sober while they are working and refuse to take drugs. They also use fake names and only wear certain clothes while working. These are all strategies that help them to separate their public and private identity. One prostitute the author met in Oslo said that her work had nothing to do with her sexuality, which remained an intimate and personal aspect of her private life. What's more, many prostitutes the author interviewed said that the job made them feel empowered and in control, rather than exploited. Some said that their previous relationships had made them feel much more insecure and powerless than when they were working, and that being paid for sex was a very strong form of empowerment. It would appear, therefore, that many of these women willingly and consciously choose this job despite the dangers they face. Relations between prostitutes and pimps or the police are often precarious. Another important factor in modern prostitution is the complex relationship between prostitutes and their pimps. About a third of the middle and upper class prostitutes interviewed by the author chose to work on their own, as they did not need or trust a pimp. The majority, however, relied on a pimp who they usually called their man or boyfriend, even though there was almost never a real romantic relationship between them, only sex in exchange for money. Pimps often managed to seduce younger girls into prostitution by winning them over with a strategic form of affection. These young women need a pimp because they have little experience and do not know how to dress, which streets to walk to earn the most money, how to contact, select and satisfy clients, and so on. Older women tend to refer to their pimp as their protector, but this is almost never the man's main role, largely because the most dangerous moment for a prostitute is not so much on the street as when she is alone with the client, where her pimp can do little to protect her. The system of codes and mutual protection between girls working in the same area appears to be much more effective in protecting their safety. Another danger that streetwalkers face is the police. They are frequently arrested and then released after a few hours, sometimes as often as 3 or 4 times per week. Some police officers, however, also abuse their power, stealing money from the girls under the pretext of confiscating illegally gained cash, or approaching them as clients, having sex with them, and only afterwards revealing themselves as police officers and arresting them. Luckily, however, many of the girls interviewed in San Francisco, especially those who are well known in the area, claimed to have a good relationship with the police, and said that some officers were concerned about them, forewarning them of imminent arrest or advising them of nights when it was best not to walk the streets. Some women choose to become sex workers for the money, but also for the freedom and sense of self-worth. American artist Carol Lee coined the term sex worker as an alternative to prostitute, which has connotations of shame, immorality, and devaluation. Lee was a member of Coyote, a sex workers' rights organization whose members are almost exclusively white, educated, middle-class girls. None of them are streetwalkers but work in indoor places such as brothels, private homes, nightclubs, strip clubs, or erotic massage parlors. The author decided to analyze what exactly attracted these girls to the profession because they were not forced into it and generally came from privileged backgrounds in terms of race, class, and education. The girls of Coyote claimed that sex work enabled them to get pleasure from sex, to release pent-up energy, and to explore the exhilarating confines of eroticism. The financial aspect, however, also has a certain appeal. Various studies and statistics show that no matter how much professional training they have, women always find it harder to find a well-paid job than men, and often end up in the lowest positions in companies or doing menial jobs that make little use of their academic studies. In the post-industrial economic world, where gender inequalities are still strikingly evident, the relatively high earning potential that the sex trade offers makes it a good choice for some women. What's more, the new lower middle class values modern-day concepts such as freedom, fun, and pleasure, whereas previous generations tended to value modesty, composure, and moderation. Finally, many women say that the sex trade also helps them to learn to appreciate their bodies because they feel more secure in themselves when clients are sexually attracted to them. While sex workers tend to experience paid sex as something of an out-of-body experience in order to separate it from their private lives, these women often consciously try to incorporate pleasure, appreciation, and authenticity into their professional practice. The technological revolution and the advent of the internet have certainly changed the sex trade, and many girls who work in clubs or brothels now choose to engage in freelance sex work, advertising their services on the internet and keeping everything they earn for themselves without having to pay anyone a commission. The internet is also more discreet for clients who are able to satisfy their personal preferences in terms of women and sexual tastes. The client's perspective is a combination of guilt and a desire for authenticity. While investigating the complex network of structures that underpin the sex trade, the author also analyzed what exactly the client purchases when they pay for sex. For instance, is it a relationship of domination, love, pleasure, or addiction? With the shift from a production-based economy to our current consumption-based economy, moral and political focus has gradually changed, so that prostitutes are increasingly normalized as sex workers or victims, while society condemns consumerist behavior. It has been argued that the recent growth of the sex trade is a reassertion of male domination in response to feminism, or as compensation for the economic disempowerment of men in the post-industrial public sector. There is actually much more to it than that. Many people maintain that one of the main advantages to prostitution is the clear and defined nature of the encounter, which modern clients seem to prefer over romantic or committed relationships. These people do not see commercial sex as a sad consequence of being alone, and even married clients very often engage in commercial sexual encounters not as a substitute for a bad relationship, but as a desirable experience in itself. Men also tend to look for a real connection with the sex worker. They do not want to see girls who constantly look at their watch, who ask for tips during intercourse, who rush through the encounter, or who refuse to hug them. They know that they are paying for sex, but they want, at least for a few minutes, a genuine sexual relationship, and they like to think that they are able to truly satisfy the woman. They pay for an emotional connection that does not come with the obligations of a relationship. Among the clients interviewed by the author, however, some also believed that paying for sex was a compulsive behavior, which made them feel ashamed and guilty. This compulsivity made them feel out of control and powerless to resist their desires, and they felt afraid, lonely, and disappointed after the act. Modern sexuality is a product of the changes in our society. Commercialized sex in the post-industrial era is also unique in terms of the social structures that support it, namely its connection to a series of changes that have taken place in economics, culture, and sexuality. The economy of the current era is largely defined by flexible accumulation, part-time and fixed-term employment, dual-salary households, and increasingly blurred boundaries between production and consumption. These factories have replaced the production-focused economy of modern industrial capitalism, in which the male breadwinner was responsible for putting food on the table and his full-time employment ensured his geographical, long-term, and social stability. Similar developments have also taken place in the way in which we organize our private lives and families. Social demographers have outlined a series of changes, especially in Western household formation and composition, namely lower marriage rates, double the number of divorce cases, and a 60% increase in the number of single-person households. These structural transformations have had a profound impact on the way many people choose to lead both their public and private lives. Insecurity and the fleeting and precarious nature of intimate relationships have led many people to reject emotionally meaningful connections and to invest this energy in market relations as workers and consumers. Daycarers, housekeepers, and takeaway food meet our need for necessary services and emotional meaning, which people used to get from their partner or family. On closer inspection, however, it appears that all these changes have only had a significant impact on specific areas of the population. Evolving in the modern and postmodern era has often been the privilege of people belonging to certain social, ethnic, and racial groups, and deriving from certain regions and nations. It is no surprise, therefore, that middle-class professionals, young people, and whites are usually the first to explore the new post-industrial paradigm of sexuality. Men in particular are more inclined to adopt this new cultural model of sexuality, simply as a result of the material conditions that have granted them more independence and freedom. Rising numbers of women, however, are also starting to get involved, not so much by paying for sex, but by using services and products targeted to women, such as sex toys, female sexuality classes, or erotic romance novels. There is a great deal of evidence that both women and men are rethinking their sexuality by acquiring a series of specific techniques, which provide personal pleasure and meaning rather than embarking on a lasting relationship with a partner. According to the author, the sex trade must be evaluated and analyzed within the context of these economic and cultural developments, and not seen as an exception to be judged in its own right. This concludes our summary of Temporarily Yours. If you would like to know more about this subject, why not start by reading the book? Meanwhile, let's just take a sneak preview with a few of the most enlightening quotes. Bodily capital, a symbolic currency often acquired by members of the dominated fractions of society who, deprived of other forms of social power, cultivate their bodies as value-producing investments. Given the gender disparities of post-industrial economic life, the relatively high pay of the sex industry, compared to other service sector jobs, provides a compelling reason for some women from middle-class backgrounds to engage in sexual labor. Sex work was also described by various women as a job which enabled them to revel in the delights of their own physicality in a way that more intellectually oriented professions did not often permit. And finally, before we close, here is 4Books' take-home messages from Temporarily Yours. Modern prostitution is not a simple or straightforward concept and encompasses the influence of many different experiences and circumstances ranging from the need to survive to a conscious choice. This choice is often based not only on financial gain, but also on freedom, independence, and self-worth.